Honey, just the coffee. Black. The grown-ups are talking about things you wouldn't understand. The words, slick with unearned confidence, dripped from the lips of the man in the corner booth. He was the picture of curated lethality, all sharp angles and sun-bleached hair. A Navy SEAL lieutenant commander holding court for his small team of operators. The crowd laughed, a nervous, sycophantic ripple through the small roadside diner. It was the kind of laughter that sought approval, the kind that validated the bully to avoid becoming the target. But the waitress, the target of his condescension, didn't even flinch. Her name, tag, read Anna, and she stood in a pool of profound calm, her posture a silent refutation of his dismissal. Her eyes, a shade of gray that seemed to hold the memory of winter skies, remained fixed on her notepad, her pen held with a steadiness that was almost unnerving. There was no flicker of anger, no hint of humiliation, only a focused professional silence. A silence that was heavier, more substantial than all the noise he was making. But when the retired general sitting alone in the opposite booth saw her stance, the way her weight was perfectly balanced, the subtle tension in her shoulders that spoke not of fear but of readiness, he lowered his newspaper just an inch. He had seen that posture before, in places where a moment's hesitation was the difference between a flag-draped coffin and a flight home. He saw not a waitress, but a sentinel. The SEAL saw a servant. The general saw a warrior standing at ease. The air in the diner grew thick with unspoken assumptions, a fog of prejudice that was about to be burned away by a truth so bright it would leave them all blind. If you believe that true respect is earned in the crucible of action and not demanded by the volume of one's voice, type respect in the comments below. This story serves as a testament to the quiet professionals, the silent guardians whose legends are whispered, not shouted, and whose competence is the only credential that ever truly matters. It is a reminder that the most dangerous people in a room are often the ones you notice last, the ones who have mastered the art of being invisible until the precise moment they choose not to be. The story of Anna is not just a story of vindication. It is a lesson in the immense power that resides in stillness, a power that needs no introduction and leaves no doubt. The lieutenant commander, whose call sign Blaze was as subtle as his personality, continued his performance. He regaled his team with tales of daring raids and impossible odds, his voice a theatrical boom that filled every corner of the small establishment. He spoke of the bond between man and beast, gesturing to the magnificent Belgian Malinois lying patiently at his feet, a creature of coiled muscle and disciplined energy named Shadow. This dog, Blaze declared, loud enough for the entire diner to hear, is a Tier 1 asset, more training than most soldiers, smarter than half the people in this town. I'd wager. He smirked at Anna as she refilled his coffee, the gesture a deliberate jab. No offense, honey, she said nothing. Her movements were a study in economy, a ballet of practiced efficiency. She refilled the heavy ceramic mug without a single wasted motion, the stream of dark liquid arcing perfectly into the center, not a drop spilled. The way she handled the hot coffee pot, the way her fingers curled around the handle with a grip that was both firm and gentle, was a small, almost imperceptible detail. To the SEALs, it was just a waitress pouring coffee. To the general, it was a demonstration of muscle memory honed over thousands of hours, the kind of fine motor control that allowed a person to disarm a bomb or apply a tourniquet in the dark. Blaze, oblivious, leaned back, his ego expanding to fill the space. You see this life? He asked Anna, a rhetorical question meant to highlight the chasm between their worlds. This is what it means to be at the tip of the spear. We're out there, on the edge, while folks like you are, well, making sure the coffee's fresh. It's an important job. I guess his men chuckled again, the sound now tinged with a growing discomfort. They were operators, trained to read a room, and the room was beginning to feel wrong. The waitress's silence was no longer passive. It felt active, a dense, gravitational force that was pulling the atmosphere inward, compressing the air until it was tight and volatile. Her calm was not the calm of submission. It was the calm of a storm's eye, a place of deceptive peace surrounded by unimaginable power. She moved on to the next table, her worn, rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor, her presence fading back in the background, just another part of the scenery. But the general knew. He knew that the most effective camouflage wasn't a pattern of colors, but the cloak of low expectations. And Anna wore it like a second skin. The moment shattered with the percussive crack of a truck backfiring on the highway just outside. The sound was sharp, violent, a convincing mimicry of a high-caliber rifle shot. For a fraction of a second, the diner froze, and then chaos bloomed. A patron screamed. A busboy dropped a tray of glasses, the sound of shattering glass adding a sharp, crystalline treble to the deep bass of the initial bang. People ducked below their tables, a clumsy, panicked herd seeking shelter. Lieutenant Commander Blaze and his team reacted as they were trained. They didn't panic, they assessed. Their heads swiveled, eyes scanning for threats, their bodies tensing as they moved to positions of tactical advantage. It was a fast reaction, a professional reaction, taking perhaps a second and a half to process the sound and orient to the potential danger. But it wasn't the fastest reaction in the room. Anna's response was not a reaction. It was an instinct. It was a neurological impulse that bypassed conscious thought entirely. Before the sound of the backfire had even finished echoing off the cheap wood-paneled walls, her body had moved. She hadn't ducked. She hadn't flinched. She had pivoted on the ball of her left foot, her body dropping into a low, balanced crouch, her head up, eyes locked on the front door. Her hands, which had been holding a customer's check, were now empty and held slightly forward, open and ready. It was a textbook tactical stance, a fluid motion of such speed and precision that it seemed to defy physics. But as shocking as her movement was, it was not the most stunning event in that chaotic second. The dog, Shadow, the Tier 1 asset, had ignored the sound completely. He had ignored his handler's movement. His entire being, every fiber of his highly trained senses, was focused on one thing: the waitress. At the exact moment she moved, the dog reacted not with aggression, but with absolute, ingrained deference. He dropped to the floor, not in a relaxed lay, but in a rigid, formal down position, his body flat, his head erect, his muzzle oriented directly toward Anna. A low, tense whine escaped his throat, a sound of profound recognition, of submission to a deeply imprinted authority. It was the posture of a working dog acknowledging its handler, a gesture of respect so profound it bordered on worship. In that single, frozen tableau, the entire power dynamic of the room was inverted. The quiet waitress and the SEALs K-9 were locked in a silent, professional communion, and the loud warrior was suddenly, completely, on the outside looking in. The world seemed to slow down, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunbeams, hanging suspended in the air. The shattered glass on the floor was a mosaic of broken assumptions. Lieutenant Commander Blaze stared, his mind struggling to reconcile what his eyes were seeing. His dog, his partner, an animal bonded to him through years of grueling training and the crucible of combat, was ignoring him completely. "Shadow, heel," he commanded, his voice tight with confusion and a rising tide of humiliation. The dog didn't even twitch an ear in his direction. Its intelligent, amber eyes remained fixed on Anna, its body a taut sculpture of unwavering obedience to a command he hadn't even heard her give. The patrons, slowly realizing the danger had passed, began to peek out from under their tables, their fear replaced by a bewildered curiosity. They saw the SEAL, a man who projected an aura of absolute control, completely failing to control his own animal. And they saw the waitress, the quiet, unassuming woman, holding the creature in a state of perfect thrall with nothing but her presence. Anna saw the situation for what it was: a professional animal in distress, a public space filled with frightened civilians, and a handler who had lost control. She acted. Her focus was not on the arrogant SEAL or the staring crowd. It was on the dog. She took one deliberate step forward, her body language calm and non-threatening. She didn't speak English. The sound that came from her was low, guttural, a single word spoken in perfect, fluent German, the foundational language of most elite K-9 training programs. "Ruhig," she said. "Calm." It wasn't a command so much as a transfer of state, an injection of tranquility into the animal's agitated mind. Alongside the word, she made a small, almost imperceptible hand gesture, 2 fingers extended and held perfectly still. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Shadow's rigid posture softened. The low whine ceased. He broke his down position and moved toward her, not with a bound, but with a fluid, disciplined glide. He pressed the side of his body firmly against her leg, his head turned outward, placing himself between her and the rest of the room in a classic guard posture. He then looked up at her, his tail giving a single, tentative thump against the table leg. The aftermath was a silence more profound and deafening than the backfire that had preceded it. It was the silence of minds being forcibly rewritten, of worldviews being shattered. Blaze's jaw hung open, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The carefully constructed edifice of his superiority had been demolished in less than 5 seconds by a single German word and a quiet waitress. That's not possible, he whispered to no one in particular, the words barely audible in the suddenly sacred stillness of the diner. From the corner booth, General Marcus Thorne rose to his feet. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man whose authority required no physical reinforcement. He had seen enough. The quiet dignity of his presence immediately drew every eye in the room, a silent command for order. He did not look at the stunned seals. He did not look at the gawking patrons. His gaze, sharp and analytical even in his advanced years, was locked entirely on Anna. He walked across the linoleum floor, his polished leather shoes making soft, rhythmic sounds that were the only noise in the diner. He stopped a respectful distance from her, his eyes taking in every detail. The perfect posture she still held, the way her hand rested gently on the K9's head, calming him with a practiced touch, and something else, a tiny, faded mark on the inside of her right wrist, mostly obscured by the strap of her simple wristwatch. It was a tattoo, barely a whisper of ink on her skin, but to the general, it screamed louder than any shouted proclamation. It was the stylized image of a wolf's head superimposed over a trident, the insignia of a unit so secret that its very existence was a subject of debate in the halls of the Pentagon. He ignored Blaze's sputtering attempt to interject. "General, sir, what the hell is going on? Do you know her?" "She's just a waitress." The general silenced the lieutenant commander with a single, glacial look, a silent order that carried more weight than a shouted command. The look did not just say be quiet. It said, "You are in the presence of something you do not understand, and your ignorance is a liability." He then turned his full attention back to Anna, his expression softening from command to something else entirely, reverence. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble that resonated with decades of command. "It has been a very long time. I never thought I'd have the honor." He saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the briefest acknowledgement of a shared, violent history before the professional mask of calm settled back into place. The mystery of the quiet waitress was about to be officially and irrevocably solved. The general turned slowly, deliberately, to face Lieutenant Commander Blaze. His eyes were like chips of ice. The air crackled with a palpable shift from quiet respect to cold, instructional fury. "Lieutenant Commander," he began, his voice deceptively soft, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You are an operator with Naval Special Warfare. You are entrusted with K9 assets. That means you are expected to know the history. You are expected to know the legends." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Blaze stood rigidly, his face pale, the color draining from it as a dreadful understanding began to dawn. "Let me ask you a question, son. On your first deployment to the Helmand province, did the old hands ever tell you stories around the fire? Did they ever whisper about the Battle of Sanjin, about the handler they called Ghost Dog?" Blaze's eyes widened. Every operator knew that story. It was a piece of institutional folklore, a myth about a phantom K9 team that had worked miracles during one of the bloodiest campaigns of the war. A handler who was never seen, whose dog could find IEDs that the most advanced technology missed, who could track enemy fighters across impossible terrain, always operating in silence, always fading away before anyone could get a clear look. The legend was that the handler was a woman, a ghost, a whisper on the comms. The general saw the recognition on Blaze's face and pressed his advantage, his voice now a sharp, staccato rhythm, listing credentials like rifle reports. "Handler, Master Sergeant Anya Petrova. Call sign Ghost. Unit, Joint Special Operations Command, K9 Support Element, attached directly to Task Force Neptune. He let that sink in. Task Force Neptune, the unit that had taken down the world's most wanted terrorist. Medals, he continued, his voice rising with righteous indignation, include the Silver Star for gallantry, a Bronze Star with Valor Device for pulling 3 wounded Rangers out of the kill zone under heavy fire, and a Purple Heart. He took a step closer to Blaze, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more intimidating. She was medically retired after her partner, a K-9 named Orion, was killed shielding her from an IED blast that nearly took her leg. That dog, Son, is buried at Arlington with full military honors. This woman before you has forgotten more about combat and canine operations than you will ever know. He then turned his back on the humiliated SEAL, faced Anna, and executed the single most profound gesture of respect one soldier can give another. In the middle of the dusty roadside diner, the retired 4-star general brought his hand up in a slow, perfect ceremonial salute. Master Sergeant Petrova, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It is an honor to stand in your presence again. Thank you for your service. The sound of the general's hand crisply striking his brow echoed in the tomb-like silence of the diner. For a long moment, nobody moved. The scene was a living portrait of shattered pride and dawning respect. The other SEALs, who had been laughing at their leader's jokes just minutes before, now stared at the floor, their faces burning with a shared, vicarious shame. They looked at Blaze not with admiration, but with a new, painful clarity, seeing the brittle ego beneath the swagger. The patrons, who had seen only a quiet waitress, now saw a hero standing in their midst, a figure of legend pulled from the shadows of whispered war stories. The diner owner stood frozen behind the counter, a dish towel clutched in his hand, his mouth slightly agape. The story was already taking root, spreading from person to person through shared, wide-eyed glances. It would be told and retold before the day was out, the details sharpening with each telling, cementing itself into local folklore. Blaze, stripped bare of his arrogance, finally found his voice. It was not the confident boom of before, but a choked, hesitant whisper. He took a clumsy step forward, his hands half raised in a gesture of supplication. "Mom, Sergeant, He struggled for words, the apology he owed too large for his vocabulary. "I had no idea. There's no excuse. I am so sorry," Anna, who had held her composure through insult and chaos, finally returned the general's salute with a short, precise nod of her head, a gesture of acknowledgement between peers. She then looked at Blaze, her gray eyes holding not anger, not triumph, but a simple, professional assessment. She was not interested in his apology. It was irrelevant to the mission at hand. She deflected his groveling with a quiet, technical instruction that put the focus back where it belonged. "The dog is fine, Lieutenant," she said, her voice calm and even. "But you need to check his paws for glass from that dropped tray, and get him some water. His adrenaline is high." Her words were not a forgiveness, nor were they a condemnation. They were the words of a professional, cutting through the emotional clutter to address the practical reality. In that moment, she taught him the lesson he had so desperately needed to learn. True competence doesn't care about apologies. It cares about the welfare of the asset and the completion of the task. The legend of that afternoon spread through the small town and the wider military community like wildfire. It traveled on phone calls, in text messages, and through hushed conversations in barracks and VFW halls. It became known as the day the general saluted the waitress, a modern fable with a clear and potent moral. The story wasn't about the humiliation of a cocky SEAL. It was about the quiet, unassailable dignity of a true professional. It was a stark reminder that heroes do not always wear their accomplishments on their sleeves. Sometimes, they wear a simple apron and carry a coffee pot, their greatness hidden in plain sight, waiting for a moment of crisis to reveal itself. Lieutenant Commander Blaze underwent a profound transformation. The brittle shell of his arrogance had been shattered, and what emerged was a more thoughtful, humbled leader. The next day, he returned to the diner alone. He didn't speak to Anna. He simply left a $500 tip on a table with a handwritten note. It contained only 3 words: lesson learned. Thank you. Back at his base, he gathered his team and used his own spectacular failure as a training tool. He recounted the entire event without sparing his own ego, his voice raw with the memory of his own ignorance. He instituted a new rule for his unit. Check your assumptions at the door. The most unassuming person in the room might be the one you'll follow into hell one day, a photo taken by a patron on their cell phone at the perfect moment. The general in full salute, Anna standing with quiet dignity, the dog at her side, was printed and discreetly pinned to the corkboard at the local VFW post. It had no caption, but it needed none. Anyone who knew the story would look at it and understand. Anna, for her part, changed very little. She continued to work at the diner, her movements just as precise, her silence just as profound. But something around her had changed. The way the other staff spoke to her, the way the regular customers looked at her, was now imbued with a deep and unspoken reverence. They saw not just Anna the waitress, but Master Sergeant Petrova, the ghost dog of Kandahar, a living legend who had chosen a life of peace after a lifetime of war. Occasionally, she would volunteer her time at the county sheriff's department, offering quiet advice and expert guidance to their fledgling canine unit, her hands moving with old, familiar grace as she worked with the animals, her legacy continuing not in shouted stories, but in the silent, competent work of her hands. A year passed, the seasons turned, and the story settled from a fresh event into an established piece of local history, a touchstone for the community. A young sailor, fresh out of BUD/S training and on his way to his first assignment with a SEAL team, stopped at the diner. He had heard the story from his instructors at Coronado, presented as a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and the importance of situational awareness. He walked in, nervous and full of the quiet intensity of a newly minted operator, and saw her. She was wiping down a counter, her movements as fluid and economical as the legend described. He approached the counter not with the swagger of his predecessor, but with a palpable sense of awe. He waited for her to finish, his hands clasped respectfully behind his back. "Ma'am," he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "are you Sergeant Petrova?" Anna looked up, her gray eyes appraising him in a single, sweeping glance. She saw his youth, his fitness, the nervous energy humming just beneath his skin. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The young sailor swallowed hard. "They tell your story at the training command now, ma'am. It's required learning." He paused, gathering his courage. "I was wondering if you had any advice. For someone just starting out." Anna stopped wiping the counter and gave him her full attention. Her gaze was not unkind, but it was intensely focused, stripping away his uniform and his training to see the man beneath. After a long moment of silence, she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying the immense weight of experience. "Listen more than you talk," she said. "Watch more than you are seen. And never, ever assume you're the most dangerous person in the room." She then picked up her cloth and went back to her work, the conversation over. The young sailor stood there for a full minute, the simple words echoing in his mind. It was the most profound tactical advice he had ever received. The narrator's voice swells with a philosophical tone. A legacy is not a monument of stone or a plaque of brass. It is not found in shouted accolades or public recognition. A true legacy is a living thing. It is the lesson passed from a veteran to a recruit. It is the change in a leader's heart. It is the quiet competence that inspires others to be better, to be humbler, to be more professional. Master Sergeant Anya Petrova's legacy was not in the medals she had earned or the battles she had fought. It was in the silence of a humbled lieutenant commander, in the respectful gaze of a young sailor, and in the enduring story that now served as a guardian against the poison of assumption. Her actions that day in the diner became an echo, a ripple of quiet strength that would continue to spread long after she was gone, a testament to the enduring power of a professional who let her competence speak for itself. The diner itself became something more than just a place to eat. It became a quiet landmark, an unofficial monument to the day that assumptions were dismantled by quiet truth. New recruits and seasoned veterans passing through the area would make a point to stop there, not to bother the legendary waitress, but simply to sit in a booth, drink a cup of coffee, and soak in the atmosphere of the place where competence had so decisively silenced arrogance. They would look over at the counter, see Anna working with her calm, methodical grace, and they would understand. They understood that the uniform does not make the warrior. They understood that the rank does not guarantee wisdom. They understood that true strength, the kind that endures, is forged in silence and demonstrated through action. The lesson of that day was not about the military or SEALs or K9s. It was a universal truth. It was a story about the bank teller who is also a chess grandmaster, the janitor who holds a PhD in philosophy, the quiet librarian who can break down a rifle in under a minute. It was a story about the vast, hidden depths within every person and the profound ignorance of judging a book by its cover. The memory of Blaze's swaggering confidence became a ghost in that room, a permanent cautionary tale against the sin of underestimation. And the memory of Anna's unshakable calm became a standard, a benchmark for professionalism that transcended any career. Her silence had spoken volumes. Her stillness had commanded a force of nature. Her simple act of pouring coffee had contained within it the same precision and focus that had saved lives on a distant battlefield. It was a powerful and enduring reminder that respect is a mirror. It reflects back what you give. Blaze had offered condescension and received humiliation. The general had offered respect and received the honor of acknowledging a fellow warrior. The legacy of that day was written not in a history book, but in the changed behavior of all who heard the tale. It was the triumph of what is real over what is merely loud. It was the vindication of the quiet professional. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.